5,000 years ago, a desperate ruler faced a problem that could destroy his empire. If the handful of men who could read and write died, his entire civilization would collapse. His solution changed the world forever. We think of school as modern, democratic, something created by governments to educate all children equally. But that's not how it started. The first schools weren't built for children at all. They were built in secret, by rulers, for a chosen few, and they emerged from a crisis so urgent that if it wasn't solved, an entire civilization would vanish. Here's what we need to understand. What problem was so catastrophic that humans had to invent formal education? What changed in human society that made it suddenly necessary? And when these first schools opened, what did they actually look like? The answer tells us something surprising about why we still have schools today. Imagine standing in ancient Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE. You're in the flatlands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, modern-day Iraq. Humans have discovered something revolutionary: organized farming. For the first time in human history, the same plot of land can feed hundreds of people. Cities begin forming, populations explode, walls are built, government emerges, bureaucracy is born. But with this growth comes a problem nobody anticipated. A father teaching his son to farm? That works. They walk the fields together. The knowledge passes through experience. But teaching a young man to manage thousands of acres across multiple villages, teaching him to calculate grain taxes, teaching him to track trade agreements that span decades, that can't happen through apprenticeship anymore. Humans needed a system to preserve information outside of human memory. They needed something that could survive generations, something that couldn't be forgotten or distorted by time. Around 3200 BCE, they invented writing, but here's what nobody expected. Writing created a new crisis immediately. The first written language was cuneiform, wedges pressed into wet clay. It wasn't invented for poetry or storytelling, it was invented for inventory. Clay tablets from ancient Sumer show lists, grain amounts, livestock counts, worker names, essentially accounting records. But cuneiform was absurdly difficult to master. The language used over 600 different signs. Some signs represented sounds, some represented entire words, some represented concepts. A single tablet might take weeks to write correctly. Learning the system took years of intense study. Here's the crisis this created. Only about 1 in 200 people could read and write. Think about that. In a city of 10,000 people, maybe 50 could actually read. If those 50 people died from plague, war, or old age, the city's entire recorded knowledge died with them. Tax records vanished. Trade agreements disappeared. Historical records evaporated. The ruling class faced an existential threat. A Sumerian king in the city of Lagash realized something. He needed to train more scribes. Lots more. But training them one-on-one would take too long. He needed a system. Around 2000 BCE, the first formal schools appeared, probably in Urad, probably in Lagash. The exact location and founder is lost to time, but the evidence survives in the clay tablet students left behind. Here's what these schools looked like. Young boys, mostly sons of nobles, priests, and wealthy merchants, would sit together in a room, sometimes outdoors, sometimes in temples. In front of them stood a scribe. The teacher would take a clay tablet and write a few words, standard phrases used in administrative documents. May the gods bless this agreement. The grain shipment has arrived. The taxes are recorded. The student would then copy that exact phrase. Not once, dozens of times, hundreds of times, day after day, year after year. We know this because archaeologists found student tablets, hundreds of them, the same sentence repeated with slightly different handwriting. Some tablets show the same phrase written 50 times, 70 times, some show more than 100 repetitions. Alongside these practice tablets, researchers found something else: graffiti. A student scratched into a clay tablet, "My hand is tired." Another wrote, "I hate this." Another, "Will this ever end?" Teachers left frustrated notes in the margins, corrections, critical comments. Some tablets show a teacher literally shattering a student's work in frustration. These were real people, real kids, real teachers, dealing with the exact same frustrations that classrooms have today. But something remarkable happened as the system expanded. More cities needed scribes, more temples needed record keepers, more merchants needed people who could verify contracts. Suddenly there was enormous demand for trained scribes. The schools couldn't handle one student at a time anymore. Teachers started organizing. They created curricula. They moved from random repetition to structured lessons. Basic phrases first, then more complex administrative language, then mathematics, then geometry, because you needed geometry to measure land and calculate irrigation channels. Advanced students began teaching less advanced students. Classrooms formed, hierarchies emerged, schools became institutions. Around this same time, ancient Egypt developed a parallel system. Young scribes in Memphis and Thebes studied in temple schools. They copied hieroglyphics, a writing system even more complex than cuneiform. Egyptian scribal schools were more formal. Teachers had titles. There were gradations of students. Eventually, there were specialized schools for different professions: administrative scribes, temple scribes, military scribes. What's remarkable is how similar these schools were despite being thousands of miles apart. They didn't copy each other, they developed independently. But both civilizations arrived at the same solution to the same problem. For centuries, this remained the only purpose of education: preserve knowledge and train the next generation of administrators. Then, thousands of years later, something fundamentally changed. Around 400 BCE in ancient Athens, a philosopher named Plato started asking a strange question. What if school wasn't just about job training? What if education could actually transform how people think? This was radical, dangerous even, because if you educate people beyond what they need for their job, they start asking questions. They start challenging authority. They start thinking independently. But Plato believed this was necessary. He established the Academy in Athens around 387 BCE, not to train scribes or administrators, but to pursue truth itself. Students studied mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, rhetoric. But the goal wasn't practical. It was intellectual. The Academy was asking, what is justice? What is beauty? What is the nature of reality? This was completely new. The curriculum wasn't designed to make students better at managing estates or conducting trade. It was designed to make them better at thinking, at questioning, at understanding the world. For about 900 years, the Academy operated. It became the model for what an institution of higher learning could be. But then Rome conquered Greece. And Romans had no interest in philosophical speculation. They cared about practical skills, military training, engineering, administration. The academy was eventually closed. The philosophical model of education nearly disappeared. It wasn't until centuries later, during the Islamic Golden Age in the 9th and 10th centuries, that something similar reemerged. In Baghdad, scholars established the House of Wisdom. Not a school exactly, but a library and research center where the most brilliant minds in the Islamic world worked together. They translated Greek texts, they advanced mathematics, they revolutionized astronomy and medicine, all because they believed that pursuing knowledge, even knowledge with no immediate practical use, was itself valuable. Then they created universities like Al-Azhar in Cairo and Al-Mustansiriya in Baghdad. Young students came from across the Islamic world to study theology, science, mathematics, and philosophy. Not because it would make them better administrators, because understanding the universe was considered noble. This is the twist. Schools started as a solution to a crisis, a way to preserve practical knowledge, but they evolved into something completely different. They became places where humans pursue questions that have no immediate answer, where we transform ourselves through learning, where ideas matter more than utility. So who actually opened the world's first school? The honest answer: nobody knows their name. The founder of that first scribal school in ancient Mesopotamia was probably a government administrator, maybe a high priest, someone practical, someone desperate. They weren't a visionary educator with a grand philosophy of learning. They were solving a problem. My scribes are dying. I need more of them. How do I train them faster? That practical problem led to a system. The system led to structure. Structure led to curriculum. Curriculum led to institutions. And institutions over millennia transformed into something the original founder would barely recognize. If we're asking who invented education as a transformative experience, as something that develops your mind, not just transfers information, then the answer is the ancient Greek philosophers. Plato, Aristotle. They believed that education could make you wise. If we're asking who built institutions dedicated to pure knowledge, it's the Islamic scholars who established universities when Europe was still in the early medieval period. But the first school? That was opened by someone whose name is lost to time. Someone who made a decision out of desperation. Someone who said, we need to teach people to read and write, fast, systematically, in groups. That decision created the first formal school. Fast forward 5,000 years. You're watching this on a device that contains more information than the Library of Alexandria. You can learn almost anything instantly. You have access to classes from the world's best teachers. You can learn a new language in weeks. You can teach yourself advanced physics. Yet we still have schools. We still have classrooms. We still have teachers. We still spend years in formal education. Why? If the original purpose was to transfer knowledge, we don't need schools anymore. We have the internet. But here's what we've learned: schools were never just about transferring information. The moment humans moved from one-on-one apprenticeship to formal classrooms, education became about something deeper. It became about community, about accountability, about the messy, unpredictable process of actual growth. When a student struggles with a difficult concept and a teacher finds a new way to explain it, that's not just information transfer. Something happens in that moment. The student's brain rewires, understanding shifts. It's transformation. That's why we still need schools. A boy in ancient Mesopotamia copying the same phrase 100 times on a clay tablet was doing something that seems pointless. But in that repetition, something changed. His brain developed new neural pathways. His hand learned precision. His capacity for focus expanded. Every student who's ever sat in a classroom frustrated, struggling, eventually understanding, they're participating in a tradition older than most civilizations. They're part of a process that's been refined for 5 millennia. The first scribes didn't know they were building something that would last this long. They were just trying to save their civilization from drowning in chaos. But they accidentally created something more powerful. They created the possibility of human growth. They created institutions where anyone could theoretically expand their mind beyond what they were born with. The methods keep changing: distance learning, AI tutoring, hybrid classrooms, virtual reality. But the core hasn't changed. We're still trying to solve the problem those first scribal schools solved. How do we preserve knowledge across generations? How do we make people capable of doing things their parents couldn't? But that raises a question for us now. If everything can be learned on the internet, what should we actually be teaching? What knowledge matters? What should we prioritize? And that's a question that educators are still struggling to answer. If you want to explore more of these questions, the moments when human civilization changed direction in unexpected ways, subscribe to this channel.